I'm digital artist Aaron Rutten, and in this video, I'll show you how to paint a hurricane. I'm going to start by creating a rough sketch of the eye of the hurricane, and then I'll draw the tail that comes off of it, and it's kind of a spiraling shape like this. Next, I'll go ahead and fill the background with a dark blue color and just vignette the edges a little bit and add in a few different blues and blue-greens, and then I'll go ahead and blend it up a little bit. Now it looks like distant waves viewed from above. I'll use a selection tool to draw in some little land shapes and just fill them with a brownish color, and then blend the edges a little bit to make them a little more jagged. These will be some distant islands. We'll go ahead and just add some texture to that. You could use any texture brush for that. I'm going to go ahead and blur that land layer so it looks more distant, and I'll do that for the background water as well. And now we can start blocking in our hurricane on a separate layer. I'm going to use a nice fluffy airbrush, something that makes kind of cloudy shapes like this, and I'm going to build it up from dark to light, so that I have a little bit of dimension here so it looks like a fluffy cloud. The worst thing you can do is make it look flat. And you can experiment with some of your other brushes. I'm using these liquid drip brushes here and then blending them to get a little bit of fringe on the outer edge of the hurricane. You just want there to be lots of different layers of clouds. Feel free to separate them onto different layers. That way you have more control over them. I'm going to use my thick paint brush, but you could also use any brush that makes little fractal shapes. I'll go ahead and paint in some of those on a new layer just to make little broken clouds. These broken clouds are kind of at the edges of the hurricane and they're getting sucked into the vortex in the center. I'm going to convert that thick paint layer to a default layer and then blend it a little bit using diffuse blur. I'll go ahead and make another layer and build up even lighter on top of my hurricane. I'll change the opacity of a few of the layers and build up on top of them again, so I have all these different planes of clouds. You're looking at this from the top down, and so there's clouds underneath clouds. I'm going to go ahead and paint in a little more fringe along the edges, doing kind of a radial shape that spirals and follows that same contour of the hurricane. And a lot of this is just building up detail, adding and subtracting. I'll go ahead and add some more of that thick paint just to build up some more thick clouds along the edges there. I think that's starting to look pretty good. I'm going to blend that a little bit after converting it to a default layer. And I'm going to dim some of my layers here because I don't want my hurricane to build up too thick too quickly. I want there to be some little shadows deep inside of it so it looks like a three-dimensional object. And if it helps, you can add in some shadows on a new layer as well, just to make sure you have a nice balance of shadow and highlight areas. I'm using that same jitter airbrush to do that. Now I'm going to go into Photoshop here, and on each of those layers, I'm going to apply a little bit of a bevel using the layer effects. That's going to help each of these cloud shapes look a little more three-dimensional by adding a highlight side and a shadow side or a bit of an edge. I think that really helps this piece quite a bit. Next, I'm going to flip the canvas horizontally. I'm going to flatten all my hurricane layers, and I'm going to liquefy this and twirl it a bit. And I'll scale it just to fit it better on the canvas. I'll go ahead and flip it back and bring it back into Corel Painter. Then I'm going to blend a little bit using the oily blender brush. This is available in my custom workspace. And I'm just going to go in really close to each of these clouds and add a lot of detail here and a lot of character. Because really you have to do some things big and broad like I did earlier, and then you have to really zoom in and add more fine intentional little details if you want this to look like a realistic or painterly hurricane, or a mix of both, which is what I'm going for here. So I'm just adding a lot of detail here in each of the clouds. Spend quite a bit of time on this and you'll see that your hurricane looks better and better. The technique for this brush is to push and pull the paint. You can smudge the paint around, and so you'll see that I can bring in dark areas and kind of pull them around into the spiral. Then I can bring light areas back in by pulling those around and just using kind of winding circular shapes to draw in all the different details for the clouds here. Just to add some more variety, I'm going to experiment with using the selection brushes. This is the fractal selection brush. I'll paint a selection which shows up in red just to show me where the selection will be. And then I can go ahead and just paint over that selection with different brushes like air brushes and chalk brushes to get some really wispy, thin fractal clouds like that. I did that on a new layer. Now I feel like my hurricane's still a little too white, a little too light, so I'm going to go ahead and add a mask to that layer and use black with that same jitter airbrush just to mask away some of that area. That'll add back in some dark areas that you'll be able to see through. And then I'll blend a little bit more with the oily blender. Now I'm going to switch to the detail oils brush and I'll draw in some little wispy, noodly looking lines that come off of the end of some of those clouds, because the clouds are kind of getting pulled in like spaghetti towards the center, and so they're getting stretched out at their very edges. I'll add in some fractal clouds using the broken paint. And if you overdo it, you can always just blend some of them away with the diffuse blur blender just to make them disappear or turn into more transparent foggy areas. Now I want to add a little more detail by using some of the distortion brushes like Turbulence and Hurricane. These are found in the FX menu. You can also find these in Photoshop under Liquify. That just twirls things up a bit. I'm going to switch to Dab Chalk Eraser, and I'm going to poke some holes in the clouds and then blend the edges a little bit. I'll add some broken paint on top of that so I have some clouds on top of the holes, and I just want some nice broken fractal looking areas. Now I'm going to try to enhance that swirling pattern in the center by blending and trying to make it kind of spiral in. That's starting to look pretty good. I'm going to use an image hose brush to put in some cloudy patterns along the right side there. I'll go ahead and make those a bit darker, and I'll use that same brush. This is a custom image hose nozzle that I created called Clouds, and it makes nice fluffy cloud patterns. Now I'm going to just distort a little bit just to reshape that center of the hurricane. I think that's looking much better. I might poke some more holes near the edges of the clouds as well, just to kind of keep it a little sparse near the edges and more concentrated in the center. Now I'm going to blend a little bit more with Oily Blender to make those stringy clouds look like they're kind of stretching out and pulling in towards the center. Add a bit of a vignette around the edges on a new layer to draw the eye towards the center of the canvas. And I'll go back into Photoshop and I'll add one final bevel on top of my flattened hurricane layers to make them pop out and look more three-dimensional. I'm going to go ahead and flip the canvas and twirl it again just to make sure that it looks like it's spiraling. I'll go ahead and flip it back, and I'm going to add a Blur Gallery tilt shift to go ahead and make this look like it's kind of going out of focus towards the top and bottom. I'm going to move that land layer so that I can actually see it and it's not being completely covered by the hurricane. I'll go ahead and brighten my water as well, and with that we have a finished painting of a hurricane. If you enjoyed this video, take a quick second to click the like button. And if you're new to my channel, I'd love to have you subscribe. I have a lot more videos for digital artists like you. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time!